Hello and welcome. My name is Nate Lilge. I am Tuleyome's Adventures and Engagement Director, and I am excited to have you all learn about the vernal pools out at the Woodland Regional Park Preserve. With me today is a volunteer board member, Glen Holstein. He is going to be our expert in the field via Zoom today. Just a little bit about Tuleyome before we get into this. Tuleyome is a nonprofit that is based in Woodland, California. We focus on education and advocacy and enjoyment of the Northern Inner Coast Range Mountains, specifically the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument region. It is over 330,000 acres of public lands. That means public lands that you can go out and enjoy. And in addition to working in those mountains, in the Northern Intercoast Range Mountains, we have actually partnered with the City of Woodland to do some work out at the Woodland Regional Park Preserve. It's 160 acres. It's a City of Woodland park. It is located directly across County Road 102 from the Spring Lake District in Woodland. Glenn, would you like to talk a little bit about what makes Woodland Regional Park Preserve so amazing?
Well, thank you, Nate. And this is really an amazing place because we don't always think of the places where we live as being really spatial, but the Central Valley is. If you look at the Earth from space, there is no other valley that is comparable to the Central Valley in the sense that it's completely surrounded by mountains and hills with one little outlet at the Golden Gate. And not only that, it is the only large valley in the world with a Mediterranean climate. In other words, a climate that gets its rain in the wintertime when things are cold and plants aren't growing. And then in the summertime, when plants get warm and start growing, the water supply for those plants has started to dry up. So they only have a very brief moment in the spring when they can both get water and warmth to grow. Our springs are very special for that reason. And in that little window that they have, to pollinate, put their flowers out and grow, they have to be very much able to attract pollinators. And as a result, California here is one of the most notable places in the entire planet for showy flowers. And they have to be showy to attract pollinators. In that brief window of time they have between cold and wet and warm and dry. And Nate took these pictures right in that window between cold and wet and warm and dry when the flowers are really out doing everything they can to attract pollinators. This is a picture of a little spot next to Woodland in the Central Valley. But if you notice to the left, there are houses. To the bottom, there are plowed fields. And those are the kinds of landscapes that cover most of the Central Valley. There's very little of the natural Central Valley left as it was first described by its earliest explorers from Spain, and later on described in English by John Muir as he walked across parts that were still natural. But because this particular area was left alone more than, except for a very few places in the Central Valley, it has parts that are still natural. And these are indicated on the map by the areas that are indicated in purple at the very far north, in the southwest, and in the southeast. And everything that's brown is no longer natural. It's been modified in ways that no longer allow native plants to be dominant unless we plant them. And then if you'll notice, especially in the natural area in the southwest, there are some little dark spots in the southeastern part of that area, and those are vernal pools. Vernal pools are something very special that because we have such a large flat valley here in the Central Valley, if there's any kind of a depression, and there are many of these because as the landscape moved up and down through plate tectonics, some old stream beds and their deep spots were uplifted and cut off from other stream areas. They were low areas that when it rained, they accumulated water, and during the cold, wet season, and then gradually during spring, they dried out as the water dried out, and by summer, they're completely dry. And in that meantime, because that's an unusual habitat to have plants starting out underwater and then finally going to maturity in dry sunlight, we have some of the most unusual plants, a whole group of plants that only grow in vernal pools. And because there are different kinds of vernal pools, the vernal pools, for example, here at Woodland Regional Park and Preserve, are very different from the ones across the valley at the Mather Preserve that are also vernal pools, but have completely different plants because their geological formation was different. So a very special place. And because we found that it was a little bit of nature left behind at the edge of a big growing city, the city of Woodland, we were able to, through Tuleyome, get the area preserved. And now it's a wonderful place with a pond that isn't natural, but it's full of birds that love a little bit of water. And then in that brown area, just to the south of it, that's an area that was completely changed, so it no longer has native plants. And that's going to be our Center for Environmental Education that extends from there up to the west side of the pond, between the pond and the natural prairie area to the west. I use the term prairie because these areas were oftentimes mislabeled as grassland. There's been some stories that grass was the original natural vegetation in the Central Valley. It's pretty clear from explorers describing the valley in the early days that this is not correct, that the valley is mostly covered by wildflowers, and probably has more wildflowers in one area, at least originally, before it was intensively farmed and urbanized, than any other place in the world. So it's an amazing place for wildflowers that was misunderstood. And I prefer to call this an area of California prairie. So we have the purple areas, California prairie, with many, many wildflowers that are not in vernal pools, and then a special kind of prairie in the vernal pools that has a different ecology because the plants start out in water and they gradually go to maturity as the water dries away. So we have a special kind of prairie in vernal pools, and then a more common type of prairie in the larger purple area. But one thing that enabled this area to be not intensively farmed is it's an area where the soil is saltier than usual. As the seabeds that were uplifted to make the inner coast range were drained by streams, Cache Creek and Pewter Creek, they carried the salts from their marine sediments down on really an alluvial fan that encompasses both the watershed of Cache Creek and Pewter Creek. But when that reached sea level, the water stopped moving, and the salts in that water that were dissolved came out of solution and produced very salty soils. And because the soils were salty, this area was one of the last areas that farmers wanted to plow up to grow crops. It's a little too salty for crops, although they've since learned how to do it, but we were able to the punch and get it preserved as a natural area. Now let's see some of the flowers that grow there.
Yes, absolutely. So I just wanted to mention that this satellite photo was taken in the height of summer. It's very brown. I went out to Woodland Regional Park Preserve yesterday and took this photo. I'm looking west towards the Spring Lake district, and you can see that there are some flowers in there, but it's mostly green with non-native grasses. But the cool thing about vernal pools is that one of the cool things is that they encourage you to slow down and look closer to see what's there. So, like Glenn said, let's talk about some of the flowers there. We're going to start with the gold fields. Glenn, go ahead, talk about these.
Well, something else to note from that last picture, was taken in May. In most Mays, that field would have been brown. Because we had an unusually cold spring, one of the coldest springs on record, and also one of the wettest springs on record, the normal spring was pushed up from sometimes late March up until May, which is something very unique. Every year is a little different. Flowers that are out every year are a little different. But we have usual display not only here, but other flower fields around Yolo and Colusa County and the Intercoast Range as well, that Tuleyome works to protect nature in. You know, California has more species of plants and more species of vertebrates than any other state, and it also has more people than any other state. So to have that many people and that much nature to protect is a real challenge. And that's Tuleyome's job, at least for our local area here. And these are goldfields. Now, goldfields is a really important genus of very showy plants. The upland goldfields that occurs in ordinary prairies, it has goldfields in some cases that are so extensive that I've actually identified them from 30,000 feet as I was flying between Sacramento and Los Angeles. They can cover massive areas. These are vernal pool goldfields of different species, and they can only occur in vernal pools. And there are no vernal pools really that I know of that are big enough to be seen from 30,000 feet. And here's what they look like close up. Beautiful plants. You can see they're in the sunflower family, and they're very typical of the sunflower family. Actually, it's called the composite family because each one of those heads consists of many flowers, flowers of two different kinds. There are the disc flowers in the middle, and you can see each one of those bumps is a separate flower. And those are for reproduction. Those are the flowers that reproduce and produce seeds. Those are what the pollen is attracted to by pollinators. And then those rays that look like the petals of a flower are actually flowers that are adapted around the outside to attract pollinators, so that the whole composite of many flowers actually looks like a single flower. And that's true of everything in the sunflower family. They tend to have these patterns, although in some cases they don't have the outer ray flowers. And in some cases they pollinate themselves, so they don't have to produce anything showy. They can just exist as a flower with, or a head of flowers with many individual flowers, but they don't have to be showy for pollinators because they can pollinate themselves.
Quick question for you, Glenn. Is this just variation between the same species of the flat head, and then this was a domed head?
Well, I think that one is probably been pollinated and is starting to grow into seeds.
Okay.
So
Right.
slightly different stages of the growth, and we often see
Got
that.
it.
You'll notice that on the leaf that you can see beneath the flower, there are little teeth that stick out. And that's a sign that we're looking at a vernal pool goldfields, because the ones that live in the non-vernal pool prairie don't have those. They have entire leaves with no teeth on the outside. That's one way to tell them. Flowers look very similar to them.
Okay, anything else that you want to tell us about the gold fields before we move on to our next one?
Okay, well, I think it's a very special one, especially for vernal pools. And unlike some of the vernal pool plants, this can occur in both the vernal pools at the eastern side of the valley and the vernal pools at the western side of the valley, which is the one that RPP, Woodland Regional Park and Preserve, is in. We're in the western vernal pools of the Central Valley, which are different. The western vernal pools are different because The water is held in the basin of the vernal pool, in the western vernal pools, by a mixture of clay and salt. And what salt does to clay, it makes it extremely sticky so water can't pass through it. And that's what holds the water at the surface if you have a very salty soil and a little bit of a depression where water can appear in. But over at the Mather vernal pools in the eastern part of the Central Valley, the silica from the granite of the Sierra Nevadas washes down and turns into a rock hard layer in soil called a hardpan. And because that has a different chemistry, it doesn't include salt, it doesn't include clay. The vernal pool plants are oftentimes different in the eastern vernal pools than these in the western vernal pools. But you can see this particular vernal pool goldfields is present in both vernal pools.
Very good. Okay, we're going to switch colors. We're going to go to the white flowers, popcorn flower.
Another group of plants that is very characteristic of vernal pools and is very adaptable. So it isn't just in vernal pools, even though it originated there. It's also found in wet ditches that get water and dry out. It can take a lot more disturbance than virtually any of the other vernal pool plants that we'll see. And this is probably Plagiobothri stipitatus, the most abundant vernal pool member of the genus Plagiobothries. Now, there's other plants in Plagiobothries that are not vernal pool plants. They grow on hillsides, and they can sometimes be so abundant they turn a whole hillside white.
And we don't have any scale in these pictures, so I'm sorry about that. But can you give us an idea about how big these flowers are?
Well, that's very interesting because this species here, Plagiobothri stipitatus, has a big variety and a little variety. This is the little variety, but where we took our vernal pool trip last Saturday, that is the big variety of Plagiobothri stipitatus, and the flowers there are, probably about an inch wide, and these are more like about a quarter of an inch wide. So very different in size, but considered to be close enough that they're in the same species.
Yes. And last Saturday, just so that everybody knows, we went out to Bear Valley, which is north of Highway 20, and we saw them up there. Okay, we got a couple more photos of popcorn flower.
And this,
these little hairs on it really make me laugh. They're very cute.
yes, and there's a group called Cryptantha that also has white flowers. It's not associated with vernal pools, but those hairs can become so gigantic on that particular group. They don't look cute anymore. They look horrendous.
All right, and then that's our last one. It was a perfect day for pictures yesterday because the dew was still on some of these flowers, made for some pretty shots. Okay. Anything else before we move on from popcorn flowers, Glenn?
This is probably the plant that you see most often in vernal pools around Central California. It's in both kinds of vernal pools, and it even gets out into roadside ditches as well, which very few of the native plants are able to do. Plagiobothri stipitatus, one of the most abundant vernal pool species in California, and it's a good native nevertheless.
Move on to blowwives.
Blowwives are not a vernal pool species, they're a prairie species. And if you notice, the flower bud is at the bottom. And you notice, unlike the goldfields, it doesn't open up and produce a showy flower, even though it's related. It's also in the same family, but a very different species. And then the flower heads to show their flowers never open up. It's almost certainly self-pollinated. And then when the seeds become pollinated, they are adapted to be blown away and spread to new habitats by the wind. They have these parachutes attached to each fruit and each one comes from a separate flower. And then a good strong wind, like some of the winds we had earlier, can blow these away and to find a new habitat, in some cases over a mile away.
And I will say that to get these photos of the blowwives, I did have to go up a big hill of about 2 inches from the vernal pools to get up high enough to where it was a little bit drier for these blowwives.
And you notice there in the center, this is another member of that composite family. Each one of those circular areas in the center is part of an individual flower, a flower that already has started to dry up and get ready to be exposed to the wind to produce that dandelion-like structure that will carry the seeds, which are at the bottom of each one of those flowers in a structure called a achene, to suitable habitat. If they're lucky, they'll get to a suitable habitat. If they're unlucky, they'll just get to some habitat where they can't grow.
Mm-hmm.
Again, what they look like, you notice that particular ecological pattern of being having the seeds or the achenes be moved by wind is the same pattern ecologically that you see in dandelion. In both cases, individual flowers open up and produce a parachute that can float a long distance in the wind till it finds a new suitable habitat. Here it is again. These are actually showier. These areas that are meant for transport by the wind are actually showier than the flowers themselves. They're easier to see. Sometimes they can cause an entire field, if they're abundant enough, to look white, like it's full of white flowers. And I've been fooled by from a distance myself by thinking they were flowers, but they're not the flowers. They're the fruits that come out after the flower has been pollinated. So the fruits then can be carried away with their seeds to be deposited in suitable habitat somewhere else.
Yeah. One that is similar to that is silver puffs.
Yeah.
This was not taken yesterday out at the vernal pools. I needed to get a picture, so this is somebody else's, but this is what they look like.
Yeah, and you notice that this one actually looks a little bit more like a dandelion. It's also in the composite family. You can see the ray flowers around the edges to attract pollinators, the fertile flowers in the middle to actually do reproduction and make an achene that can be transported somewhere else to start a new flower. And you'll see many more of the reproductive structures. Here's the bud of the flower before it opens up after pollination. And here's how it opens up to ecologically mimic the blowwives and also ecologically mimic dandelions. And the ripe fruits are carried away by the wind by those structures that you see there. But you'll notice that if we looked at the original flower, that looked a lot more like dandelion. And even though the blowwives and the silver puffs and the dandelion are all in the same family, the silver puffs are a native that is much more closely related to dandelion than the blowwives is. They're both from the composite family, but kind of different ends of it, completely different ends of the composite family. So this one is close, even though it's a native, to non-native dandelion, and the silver puffs are a long way away genetically in the same family. But that's
Are they roughly the same size? The seed heads there.
Yeah, the silver puffs are only about half the size of the blowwives, and they're even a little bit smaller than the head of a dandelion. Pretty tiny.
Yes. And for comparison here, we have blowwives versus silver puffs.
Yep, the little top are the blowwives, or excuse me, are the silver puffs.
Silver puffs.
Bottom is the one of the blowwives, and you notice it's more than twice the size of the silver puffs, and not very closely related. There's a bud of the blowwives down at the lower right. But ecologically, it's an example of unrelated plants or very distantly related plants having a real convergence ecologically in the way they spread their seeds.
Let's move on from those to woolly marbles. These are fun ones to, when you stumble upon them through the grass, they're fun to see.
This is a really classic vernal pool plant. It's almost never found anywhere else but a dried bottom of the vernal pool, not even along the edges, because there are plants that are very showy along the edges. This is the kind of a vernal pool plant that stays underwater the longest. And even though it's in the sunflower family with lots of little flowers, they're not showy at all. They're not attracting pollinators like many of the other members of that family. They probably pollinate themselves even when they're underwater as the vernal pool is drying out. But if you find the bottom of a vernal pool where it's pretty muddy, that's where you're going to find this particular plant. Woolly marbles, very distinctive, very typical of California vernal pools. And once again, this is a plant that's found in all kinds of vernal pools, not just the kinds that are on one side of the valley or the other.
So you said it's in the composite family, so I assume all these little nubs here are individual flowers.
That's correct. That's exactly what they are, yeah. But not showy. Other ones we've seen like goldfields.
Yeah. And like you said, they're right on the ground, so they don't stick up more than an inch off the ground.
Right. Yeah. They stay underwater as long as any of the other plants in the vernal pool. And so oftentimes the area around them is the bare mud that because water has been there so long that it's excluded every other plant except this one. So they're surrounded by bare mud. If you find bare mud at the bottom, that's the best place to look for woolly marbles. Okay.
Another non-vernal pool specific plant is ethereal spear.
And this is a plant that is probably one of the most abundant of California's prairie plants, not just in the Central Valley, but it gets up into oak woodlands. It covers prairies that are on hillsides, sometimes with a solid mass of violet. It's a little unusual to see it down close to vernal pools in heavy soil like this, and probably because of the salt, it's a little shorter than most spears. In fact, if you look at it, it looks, maybe that's not an ethereal spear, it's so short, but that's probably because it's a little bit stressed from being in soil with so much salt. Most of the places where it grows and grows big and abundant are areas of prairie that have very little salt, if any. And here's a close-up. It's closely related to brodias, but one way you can differentiate ethereal spear and its relatives from brodias, even though they're related, is that this one has 6 stamens, and the other members of that family only have 3 in the middle. So that's a sure sign that you're dealing with the group called Tritilia. And this is Tritilia laxa ethereal spear. And you want to tell that little story about how these plants got their names?
I do. Yeah, there's the story going around that there are 2 different groups of people, of Europeans named the flowers when they got to California. It was the Padres, the people coming up from Mexico, what is now Mexico, and naming it very angelic names like ethereal spear. And then there are the ranchers that had a little bit more colorful names for their flowers. So we have ethereal spear and we have blowwives. We can take a guess on who named each of those. All right. Let's move on to the Downingia. I like these ones. They're very pretty.
Well, Downingia is a spatial group of plants that is very much associated with vernal pools, especially in California. Many species of Downingia are in California vernal pools. A few of them get into vernal pools out in the Oregon desert, but most of them are right here, especially in the Central Valley. And if we can see a close-up of the flower here, this one,
Yes, we'll get closer.
which is, I believe, one of the most beautiful of all the Downingias. It's certainly one of the most striking of all the Downingias. And this one is confined to the vernal pools that have water there because they have salty clay below it. It doesn't get into the vernal pools like the ones at Mather, where they have a hard pan beneath them. This one is strictly in the salt-affected, clay-affected vernal pools, only on the west side of the Central Valley, and one of the most beautiful of all the Downingias. By the way, Downingias are in the Campanula family, and that is really the most abundant family over in the Hawaiian Islands. But they're not vernal pool plants over there because the Hawaiian Islands don't have vernal pools. But over there, they're shrubs and oftentimes trees, very spectacular trees. And unfortunately, many of them have gone extinct because their pollinators have been lost to diseases. But there's still some there, and more native species in Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands, than any other family.
I have a question for you, Glenn. You see the little hook above. I assume that's for the pollinating insects coming. Are they, do they require a native bee, or can any old bee come and pollinate them?
Well, they certainly are adapted because they've been here. Our just about the only non-native bee we have is the honeybee, and the honey is just about everything. But we have an incredible diversity of native bees, all the way from bees bigger than a honeybee to bees much smaller than a honeybee. Some of them are brightly colored. There's a couple of them that are look like emeralds. They're so brightly colored green. And in many cases, these native flowers have particular pollinators. I saw a sad case where the flowers were preserved, but the nests of the bees were destroyed. And as a result, the flowers that were preserved died because they lost their pollinator. So you not only need to protect the flowers themselves, but the surrounding, in case of vernal pool plants, the surrounding uplands where the bees make their home. Because if you destroy the bees, you ultimately destroy the flowers as well. And you notice the structure of that flower. The bee is going to be attracted by that really colorful part in the bottom of the flower. It looks like a couple of fried eggs next to each other. And the pollinating part is above that. So as they're going for what may be a little bit of honey there, their back rubs against that upper reproductive structure and drops pollen that then can be carried to another flower. And that's how plants get pollinated in this group.
All right. Anything else that you want everybody to know about Downingia before we move on?
One of my favorite groups. Beautiful.
All right. Well, another favorite of yours.
Definitely another favorite of mine is the alkali milk vetch. And one of the major reasons why I joined Tuleyome was because there was a wonderful population of alkali milk vetch near the city of Woodland. And I was just all by myself, and I couldn't get a project stopped that destroyed over 1,000 members of this particular species. And very beautiful, very much associated with vernal pools. So I said, if I ever find another population, I'm going to get as many friends together as I can to protect. So I joined Tuleyome, got their help, and we got this Woodland Regional Park and Preserve preserved because this was a place that still had alkali milk vetch, and that's one of the plants that it was created to preserve. Very rare, and it only occurs some years, even though that was one of the reasons that Woodland Regional Park and Preserve was actually created the last couple of years, we haven't seen any of this species, but this year, it was out in the thousands. And so I can feel good that we are still preserving it. It's present in the thousands, just needs a good year to flower. And let's look at the next plant.
Yes. Same thing, same story with this, huh?
A little different. It's a little different story. I found the alkali milk vetch first, which was the first inspiration to work on preserving Woodland Regional Park and Preserve. But then I didn't realize this at first, but it also had a federally endangered species, meaning it's one of the rarest plants in the world on that same site. And that helped get it preserved because this is a federally listed endangered species. And when the original plan was for this area to be developed, when they found out it had a federally listed endangered species, this plant here, it was preserved and is the Woodland Regional Park and Preserve that attracts students and volunteers from all over the area, sometimes over 100 people, and it's going to be open to the public pretty soon. And because this plant is protected, as rare as it is, it's doubled in population with the protection it gets now in Regional Park and Preserve. It mainly was a widespread plant in the Central Valley, not in vernal pools, but in upland prairie, particular prairies that had more than the usual amount of salt in the soil. But even those, as they became intensely farmed, more and more of it disappeared. So there was very little of this plant left anywhere in the world. But we have it here at Woodland Regional Park and Preserve. We keep it very well protected. It's well taken care of, and it's doubling in population. So this is a real conservation success. It's one of those, remember I talked about how California has the largest number of species. Well, this is one that is still part of that largest number of species of any state. It's not one that got knocked off the list by going extinct. And we can thank the activists at Tuleyome for making that happen and preserving it. And many other botanists in the area are also protecting it. So we have a good home for it now. It's safe and will not become extinct if we can help it. And I think we've done an awful lot to keep that from happening. Beautiful plant, a very rare plant, and a really special plant that even the federal government was so enamored of it that they put it on the endangered species list.
Yes, and this is one that you can see when you get up close and personal with it. You can see the salt crystals being exuded out through the leaves. And these are the flowers, right, Glenn? It's not a very showy flower, but that's it.
They're not particularly showy, but they are there. And this plant has a natural association with saltgrass. Now, saltgrass is a plant that's is more abundant around San Francisco Bay than inland areas like this. But we have saltgrass here, and there is a mutual association between this plant and the native saltgrass that is also here. That's one of California's relatively few native grasses. We have an awful lot of introduced grasses, but saltgrass is a true native California grass.
All right, fantastic. That is the end of our vernal pool tour at Woodland Regional Park Preserve. Thank you for watching. Glenn, thank you for coming on. I'd like to thank the City of Woodland as well for being a great partner to make this happen. So Tuleyome, if you want to find us, this is where we're located. We're located downtown Woodland, right on Main Street. You see our phone number there. You can go to tuleyome.org. If you want to support us, you can go to this donation link here. And if you don't like writing things down and you prefer to take pictures, here's the QR code. So again, thank you for joining us. Glenn, any words of wisdom, any parting thoughts that you want to share?
Yeah, I want to thank you a lot, Nate, for taking these wonderful pictures and helping us learn about flowers. We've done so many great trips thanks to your leadership. It's been amazing. You've been a wonderful champion of Tuleyome, and we really appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. You're making me blush. I look like the owl's clover over my shoulder here. Yes. All right. Thank you very much.